Good morning, and thank you for joining us again online. Just to let you know, I host a Zoom at 4 o'clock Central every Sunday for those of you that would like to discuss the sermon or whatever else comes to mind. And I'll put that Zoom link on the links where you get the sermon from on YouTube and on Facebook pages. I also host a Zoom on Wednesdays, one at 9 o'clock in the morning Central and one at 5 in the evening Central, that are just sort of open. We're trying to help people to stay in contact with each other, connected during our lingering pandemic lockdown. I'm hoping that that's going to end soon, and maybe we won't need the Zoom so often, but I recognize that a lot of the people that join us don't live in Springfield, so even when we return to seated services, we may keep one or two of those Zooms going to give our extended global audience a chance to talk with us and touch base. So please do join us. Please do join us if you possibly can. What I'm thinking about this week is now that 20% or more of Americans have been vaccinated, and probably twice that many are still sporting antibodies from having been infected with COVID-19, we're finally reaching a point where some of us are cautiously re-entering the world of face-to-face social contact. We're even going to start having seated services again in May, inviting only people who are vaccinated to attend, but we want to see if we can begin to get together again in a safe way after more than a year of our pandemic lockdown. Recently, a small group of my vaccinated friends and I decided that we would attend a small venue, carefully spaced concert at one of our local small venues that to get in, you have to buy a table of 4, and there are 7 of us. So we need to agree on an 8th person to pay for that last chair. And you wouldn't think that would be so hard to do, but as we began to discuss it, the first couple of names that I threw out, close personal friends of mine, they had some bad history with one of the other people in the group, so it wouldn't be universally comfortable for me to invite one of them. Of course, the next person suggested was someone with whom I've had some conflict. I don't hate her, I don't wish her ill, but I don't want to sit next to her on a very expensive Saturday night. And so it went with suggestion after suggestion, almost like the process of voir dire before a jury is selected, and we couldn't agree on an 8th person. And in almost every case, when someone would come up that used to be a friend or someone we've had contact with, one of us had said to another one in the group, I really think you ought to just get over it, which is to say, they don't bother me, so they shouldn't bother you, which in a way is like telling a very good friend, your feelings don't matter. You should just sort of sacrifice some part of yourself so that I can emerge from this year-long pandemic with all of my friends intact. Folks, it's been a rough year. 500,000 people have died, which means that there are millions of people who are grieving. Tens of millions have lost their jobs. Many have lost their homes. Marriages have fallen apart due to the stress. Some of my best friends. The suicide rate is way up. Alcohol and drug abuse has spiked. Even those of us who have been blissfully free of panic attacks or serious episodes of depression prior to 2020 have realized that we just might not be as strong as we thought we were. Human beings are hardwired for social interaction, and without it, we don't really thrive all that well. Even those of us who have remained employed, housed, and healthy have also experienced very real, palpable anxiety, sometimes just about going in the grocery store or the pharmacy or having to wait at an auto mechanic shop. And we keep encountering people who refuse to keep their distance, refuse to wear a mask, or show any signs of civil awareness of how dangerous that their careless behavior can be. I don't know about you, but for me, the stock value of human beings has plummeted in the last few months. And I've even heard what I'm willing now to say our former friends say, I just don't care. If people are that afraid of getting sick, they should stay home. I'm not going to change my behavior. Or those who refuse to get vaccinated because they want to wait until a few more million people have had it to see how it affects them. Or the people that are literally afraid that it's the mark of the beast or that it's all just a hoax. Over the past year, we have been irrefutably presented with the fact that an awful lot of folks are not very smart. And even more folks who certainly understand the issues, who simply don't care about anyone but themselves. The pandemic came, unfortunately, in the final year of the tragically polarizing presidency of Donald Trump, who had done everything he could do to stoke the flames of partisan hatred, racial prejudice, class warfare, and folks, even fascism. So we were pretty engaged in being at one another's throats before we ever heard of COVID-19. And those polarized groups turned a global health crisis, into a political crisis, dividing classes of our nation. I truly, it's been, 3 months now, 4 months since the insurrection? I cannot believe that the United States of America came this close to an open civil war. American culture has been and still is very sick. A lot is riding now on how we come out of the pandemic. So I want to talk about two things today: forgiveness and boundaries. If you wanted to judge your way through life, it really wouldn't be that hard to do. People give us lots of reasons. In fact, if you're not going to judge your way through life, and this is no exaggeration, if you're not going to judge your way through life, you must make a conscious and powerful decision to suspend judgment. As the popular 19th century Scottish pastor, Reverend John Watson, advised, be kind, because everyone you meet is carrying a heavy burden. Now, people often behave very badly, but if we could just allow ourselves to assume that everyone we meet is carrying a heavy burden that we cannot see. We don't know who in their life has died recently. We don't know what their financial situation might be. We don't know what their addiction status is. But if you just notice what's in the grocery store shopping carts all around you, there's an awful lot of booze going out of the stores these days. We don't know what their health is. We don't know what trauma has affected them. Sure, undoubtedly, there are people that are just leading a charmed life in spite of the pandemic, that they're not dealing with addiction, they're not dealing with cancer or grief. But it is fairly safe to bet that almost everyone we meet who is being short-tempered, confrontational, inconsiderate, that there is something in their lives that, while it might not be a sufficient excuse, It might not be a good cause, but at least it is a reason. You've heard me quote St. Thomas à Kempis before, who said that if you will take the time to fully understand anyone, you will find it possible to be fully forgiving. Now, my audience is almost universally a self-selected group of progressive liberals who have passionate feelings about a large array of social justice issues. You are my peeps. The laundry list of things that we are passionate about, however, if we allow it to happen, that laundry list can make us virtually incompatible with almost everyone in the world. Almost half the people in our country are still supporters of Donald Trump. Many of them would be willing to completely seal our borders against all immigrants, and honestly, I shudder to think, given the legislation that's been passed about not giving medical treatments to transgender people in at least 2 states in the country, what would happen if legislators actually advocated permanent imprisonment for drug addicts or homosexuals or addicts, or even stoning them? How many Americans would go along with those ideas? But even among liberals, there are those who simply cannot abide other liberals who still eat meat, or who drive a gas-guzzling car, shop at Walmart, live in a gated community. Honestly, liberals always seem to be just this far away from becoming cannibals. We are more ready to devour one another in harsh judgment than to enjoy and celebrate truly the myriad of things that we have in common. The 4th century Roman historian, Marcellinus, wrote about the last non-Christian Roman Caesar, Emperor Julian the Apostate, that Julian brought together all of the priests and bishops of his area, invited them into the palace for an open discussion of their beliefs. And Marcellinus recorded in this 4th century history, the emperor thought that freedom to argue their beliefs would simply deepen their differences so that he would never face a united common people. He found from experience that no wild beasts are as hostile to men as Christians are to each other. What Julian observed 1,700 years ago, I'm afraid, is even more true among liberal religious people in the 21st century. Now, I know that calling people out for being easily offended and overly sensitive will probably just offend them again. But over the past few years, I've had a lot of invitations to travel and speak in other churches. And almost all, I can only think of 2 exceptions in the United States, all those invitations come from Unitarian Universalist churches. And I personally find the Unitarian Universalist approach to faith to be the most agreeable of all the choices on the menu. My personal church membership is placed with the largest Unitarian church in the country. And yet I have experienced in all of these congregations that I've visited that every single one of them are divided against each other in shockingly toxic ways. There's always a subgroup threatening to leave. Now, Thomas Jefferson once said that he believed that before the current generation had passed away, that everyone in the United States would be a Unitarian. And for a faith that actually fits the modern scientific age, that really should be the vessel of thinking, compassionate, spiritual people, I think the Unitarians have got what they should have to offer. But their congregations are almost all very small, right on the verge of collapse, and they don't get along with each other. I could cite a fair list of reasons why I believe that is so, but I suspect that I have already said too much. I would be amongst the last to suggest to a progressive audience that you should lighten up on your convictions, that you should dilute your passions and get along at all costs. We need more prophets. There's already too much apathy in this country. We need more people to take prophetic stands. I'm just saying, if you expect purity of convictions in others as a prerequisite of having a relationship with them, when you know you've got so much impurity in yourself, then we're not really dividing these congregations by principles. We're dividing them by egos. And we should stop that, shouldn't we? If our goal is to educate others, to heighten awarenesses of moral issues, to encourage others to share in our passions about social justice causes, well, that can happen. It does happen. But I'm going to suggest that it virtually never happens until people feel safe, until they feel unjudged, put down, or belittled. Change of that sort happens when we feel accepted, when we can feel loved and included as we are with all of our foibles. Then we are allowed to engage in open-minded conversation, and in that setting, people really do change their minds. Trust me, if people could be judged into changing, I would have had this whole city cleaned up 30 years ago. Let's face it, we are all fundamentally evangelists. We're not evangelists trying to convert people from one magical set of beliefs to another set of magical beliefs. We want to convert people into believing that universal health care could be instituted in the United States and it would cost us less than what we're paying now. We want to convert people into believing that we really can pay women the same thing that we pay men when they do the same job. And we want to convert people into the understanding that the sexual orientation of the person sitting next to them in the pews or living down the street is none of your damn business. And it can be done. Most of us were not born into progressive liberal homes. We changed, so other people can change too. But love always works better than judgment. And if we cut off contact with people whose current beliefs and behaviors are deplorable, and a lot of time they are, then what real chance do they actually have to ever change? Remember, you changed because you were in a social, educational, and spiritual community that allowed you the freedom to think and grow. So just don't close the door behind you. Don't burn down the bridge when you have been able to move past where you started in life. But I did say I want to talk about two things as we emerge from our pandemic hiding places. One crucial spiritual value that should be true of Buddhists and Hindus, Jews and Christians, Muslims and Unitarians is a high value for forgiveness and all of its cousins: compassion, tolerance, sincere love, and even reconciliation. But I feel compelled to also talk to you about boundaries. Because seriously, folks, you can't be reconciled with everybody. Everybody's not ready. A lot of people don't deserve it. And a lot of people will never get there. Yes, try your best to suspend judgment. Focus on changing yourself rather than being critical of others. Extend yourself to show undeserved, unearned compassion. And try to find common ground with people. Don't focus on where you're different. Try to focus on where you agree. Try to stay in conversation with family members, with neighbors, with coworkers and friends, even the ones with whom you have vital disagreements. I just want to tell you, folks, this past Tuesday, I was an election judge at a polling place where they pair a Democrat with a Republican. I sat next to a Republican for 13 hours who was uneducated, opinionated, Fox News watching, unvaccinated Republican who swears that wearing a mask has absolutely no impact on the spread of the virus. And look at me. I am not under arrest. There are no indictments against me. I did not commit homicide, assault, or anything. All I'm telling you is, if I can do it, you can do it. But forgiveness does not mean the same thing as amnesia. Suspending judgment doesn't mean that you also have to abandon your values, abandon your beliefs, or your ethics. Trying to stay in community with people does not mean that you have to sacrifice your soul in the process. Look, you wake up every day with a limited amount of emotional energy. If we say you've got 100 units of emotional energy, that's your daily strength. And some days you're going to have to spend 150, which means you're borrowing against tomorrow and the next day. So you've got to make conscious decisions about how much emotional energy that you've got to spend. Just navigating through life, staying informed about the news, dealing with work, home maintenance, traffic, bills, the family that lives in your house. That can take almost all of it at certain stages of life, and even at other events, it takes some. So how much can you afford to spend on those who only take energy from you? There are people you spend time with that sometimes you get energy from them and sometimes you give them some energy, but you know there are people who are going to make a withdrawal from you every time you see them, who will not stop sending you authoritative videos about how the vaccine is just Bill Gates' way of getting to implant a GPS into your body, or RNA-based vaccines will change your DNA and make you suddenly need to go out and buy a Subaru and listen to NPR and vote for a Democratic socialist. Or the persistent friend who is constantly trying to use friendship as access to manipulate you into a romantic relationship. How much energy, how much leeway, how much access do you give to people who don't want what you've got to offer, but they do want to control you, to change you, to own you, to screw you, or in some other way take possession of your very self? Even if it's your oldest high school friend or a former roommate or your brother or your mother, sometimes you've got to put up solid boundaries that allow you to stay in charge of deciding how much of your energy you can afford to give that person. As I have told you before, you are not called to be the asshole whisperer. Or, to use the words of Jesus, do not cast your pearls before swine, which to me seems more harsh than the asshole whisperer, but Matthew 7:6, look it up. I'm a big believer in forgiveness and reconciliation, but it has to be accomplished in a healthy way. And I'm not saying this to empower you to reject people. I'm encouraging you to be reconciling wherever it can be done in a healthy way. But as Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, forgiveness without confession is cheap grace. When a real offense has taken place, the mere passage of time, especially the passage of time in silence, doesn't really make any difference, does it? I mean, if you've been really wounded and it's been 4 or 5 years, does it not matter anymore because it's been 4 or 5 years? Everybody makes mistakes. Just don't let your mistake become a character flaw by failing to apologize. People of conscience should always strive to make a mistake right, to to do what you can to make it right. Forgiveness without confession, without acknowledgement of the fault, is a demand that you have to choose to be an amnesiac, or you have to accept their devalued view of you, that you are not worth being treated with respect, and in fact, you may deserve abuse. The mere existence of social media makes it almost certain that everyone within the sound of my voice has said something that you know good and well you shouldn't have said. And you may have said it to someone you really shouldn't have said it to. Sure, we've been under a lot of stress. We've been fed a lot of propaganda. We've watched so much news that we all think that we are degreed virologists at this point, dispensing judgment and instructions on how everyone else ought to manage their security, their pandemic measures. To end the pandemic, we may need more than a vaccine and a haircut. We may also need some humility. Enough humility to own up to our mistakes, to hold out an olive branch wherever doing so is possible. This church has often sung a song declaring that love is our religion. But you know, between 4 years of Donald Trump and a year of a pandemic, it looks like a lot of us are in danger of losing our religion. I just implore you today to remember the kind of person you know in your heart that you really want to be. Now, you know what is the most important. Sure, respect yourself, guard your emotional health. But to quote St. John, let us then love one another, for love is of God, and God is love. Anything that's ever going to give credibility to your spiritual life is going to look like love. And love is not a feeling. It's a verb. It's action. So even the 7 of us that have one more $35 seat to sell, one of us is going to have to go first and grow up a little. I hope you can do the same.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.